The morning the bank truck rolled up Calloway Bottoms Road, Wrenna Calloway was standing in 80 acres of wheat that was about to drown. Behind her, 3 of the biggest combine harvesters in the county sat parked at the fence line like sleeping dinosaurs, $500,000 of steel that couldn't move an inch onto her land. Not because they weren't powerful enough, because the ground itself had turned against them. And in her hands, Wrenna held the one tool every man in that county had laughed at just 4 days earlier. A scythe so old the handle had darkened to the color of coffee, its blade freshly hammered thin as a whisper. What happened over the next 72 hours would end up in the local paper, get talked about at 3 different diners, and change how an entire farming community thought about mud, machines, and the woman everyone had underestimated. Before we get into it, if you love true-to-life farm stories with real grit, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this channel brings you a new one every week, and you will not want to miss what's coming next. Wrenna Calloway was 38 years old, raising her 9-year-old daughter Marlo alone on 62 acres of wheat ground in eastern Washington's Palouse country, land that had belonged to her grandfather, then her father, and now, precariously, to her. Her husband had left 4 years earlier, taking the good pickup and leaving behind a mortgage. Since then, Wrenna had run the farm mostly by instinct, by borrowed equipment, and by the grace of a bank that kept extending deadlines it swore it wouldn't extend again. This year, the deadline was real. The final wheat check needed to clear $91,000 by the last week of August, or Bridgepoint Agricultural Bank would take the land and sell it most likely to Corbett Vane, the owner of Vane Grain Operations, who farmed nearly 4,000 acres in 3 counties and had made no secret of wanting the Calloway Bottoms parcel. It sat between 2 of his largest fields, and buying it out from under a struggling single mother would round out his operation nicely. Corbett Vane was not a cruel man in the cartoonish sense. He was worse than that. He was patient. He'd offered to buy the land twice already, both times at a price that would have covered the debt and nothing more. Both times Wrenna had said no. So he waited, the way a man waits when he knows the math is on his side. What none of them accounted for was the storm. In the second week of August, a slow-moving low-pressure system parked itself over the Palouse and dumped 4 inches of rain in 36 hours, a genuinely unusual event for that time of year, when the region depends on the wheat drying down in dry summer heat before harvest. The rain itself didn't ruin the crop. What it did was worse. It turned the deep, powdery less soil the Palouse is famous for into something closer to wet cake batter. This is the part most people outside farming never think about, and it's worth understanding, because it's the whole reason this story happened at all. Palouse soil is wind-deposited silt, incredibly fertile, but with almost no structural strength when saturated. A modern combine harvester weighs somewhere between 15 and 35,000 pounds empty, and considerably more full of grain. Drive that weight onto soaked less, and the machine doesn't just get stuck, it can sink to the axles, rut the field so badly it takes seasons to recover, and in the worst cases, roll on a slope that's turned to soap. Corbett Vane's agronomist told him flatly, nothing heavy goes into those fields until they firm back up. Estimated wait, 5 to 7 days. The problem was the wheat wouldn't wait 5 to 7 days. Overripe wheat left standing in wet conditions starts to sprout in the head, a process called pre-harvest sprouting, which ruins the grain's milling quality and can drop its market value by more than half. A 5-day delay wasn't an inconvenience. For every farmer with a mature crop still standing, it was a countdown to watching a year's income spoil in the field. Vane's 4,000 acres sat waiting. So did his 2 nearest competitors. All that horsepower and not one machine could move. Wrenna's field was ready to cut that same week $91,000 of wheat standing gold and heavy, and starting to sprout with every hour of humidity. That's when her neighbors started laughing. Because Wrenna didn't own a combine, She'd never been able to afford one, and the custom harvester she usually hired had 6 other farms ahead of her on the list, all of them Vane's size, all of them paying more per acre. She was going to lose her window. Everyone assumed she'd lose the crop. Instead, she walked out to her grandfather's old equipment shed and pulled out his scythe. Her great-uncle Osric tell her grandfather's brother, 91 years old, sharp as a tack, and the last man in the county who still remembered pre-mechanized harvest had taught her to use it as a teenager, more as a curiosity than a practical skill. She'd spent 2 summers learning the rhythm of it, the low, sweeping stroke, the way you let the blade's weight do the cutting instead of muscling it, the specific angle of the heel against the stubble. Osric had also taught her to peen the blade, hammering the edge thin and cold forging it sharper than any grinder could manage, and to true it up with a whetstone every 20 minutes of cutting. A scythe, unlike a combine, weighs about 5 pounds. A person walking a field in rubber boots exerts roughly a quarter-pound of pressure per square inch on the ground. A 30,000-pound combine, even on wide tires, can exert over 10 times that. The mud that stopped Corbett Vane cold didn't even slow Wrenna down. Word got around fast smaller farms always know each other's business, and by the second morning, people started driving out along the road just to see it. A woman in a straw hat and her father's old canvas coat, swinging a blade through standing wheat in long, even strokes, her daughter Marlowe trailing behind her with a wooden hay rake, gathering the cut stalks into neat rows called swaths, exactly the way Osric had shown them both. It was slow, brutal work. A skilled scyther can cut roughly half an acre to an acre a day, depending on the stand, and the person's conditioning nothing close to a combine's 40 or 50 acres an hour under normal conditions. But normal conditions weren't on the table. The math had changed. A combine doing 0 acres an hour beats no comparison at all. There was one more wrinkle nobody saw coming, and it's the part of the story that turned a nice local anecdote into something people still bring up at the feed store. On the 3rd morning, Wrenna's neighbor to the north, a semi-retired dairy farmer named Halden Prue, drove down her lane before sunrise to tell her something that made her stomach drop. Vane's crop insurance adjuster had been out walking the fence line the day before, and Halden had overheard him mention, almost offhand, that Vane was considering an early claim on his own standing wheat, filing for pre-harvest sprout loss before the second storm even arrived, based on projected damage. If that claim went through fast enough, and if county assessors used the same rain data across all standing fields in the area to set the region's damage baseline, Wrenna's still uncut acres could get swept into the same unharvestable pre-storm total loss designation on paper. Even though her wheat wasn't lost at all, it was simply still standing, waiting for her scythe. A paperwork technicality like that could tangle her sale at the co-op in red tape for weeks, well past her bank deadline, regardless of the grain's actual quality. It wasn't malicious on Vane's part. He likely didn't even know her name was anywhere near that report, but it meant Wrenna now had 2 clocks running against her instead of one. The storm bearing down from the Pacific, and a county assessment meeting scheduled for that Friday afternoon that could quietly reclassify her crop before she'd even finished cutting it. So she did the only thing she could do. She got the co-op's grain manager, a blunt, no-nonsense woman named Ottilie Marsh, out to the field in person on day 4 ahead of schedule to inspect and log the already harvested bundles under tarp, real grain, real moisture readings, real proof the crop existed and was sound, filed and dated before Friday's meeting could touch it. Ottilie walked the rows, checked kernel moisture with a handheld meter, and signed off on the spot. Wrenna's harvest was now a matter of official record, immune to whatever baseline got set for everyone else's still standing fields. It was the kind of quiet, unglamorous move that never makes it into a movie version of a story like this. But it's exactly the kind of thing that actually saves a farm, not a single dramatic swing of the blade, but knowing which forms to file and which neighbors' stray comment to take seriously. This is where the story could have stayed a nice local anecdote. Small farmer scrapes by. Everyone claps politely. What made it something people still talk about was the second storm. Forecasters flagged another system building off the Pacific, expected to reach the Palouse in 5 days, bringing another 2 to 3 inches of rain. If it arrived before the fields dried, it wouldn't just delay harvest again, it would finish the sprouting damage the first storm had started, across the whole region. For Vane and the other big operations, still waiting on their soil to firm up, the second storm meant a real chance of losing a significant percentage of that year's crop value. For Wrenna, working by hand, the mud was never an obstacle in the first place. She had a 5-day head start nobody else in the county had, because she was the only person whose harvest method didn't depend on the ground holding a vehicle's weight. She worked from first light until her hands blistered through her gloves. Osric came out each afternoon to true her blade and take a turn himself, moving with the unhurried economy of someone who'd done this before combines existed on that land at all. Marlowe kept pace behind them, raking, bundling, hauling water. Neighbors who'd laughed 4 days earlier started showing up with their own scythes pulled out of sheds and barns, some of them older than the county itself, offering to help swing them through the last few acres. By the time the second storm rolled in, Wrenna Calloway's field stood cut, bundled, and under tarp in her barn, every bit of its saved milling quality intact. Corbett Vane's fields and his competitors took the second round of rain standing. When his combines finally rolled 3 days later, initial grain samples showed sprout damage across roughly a third of his acreage, a loss that, by his own agronomist's later estimate, ran well into 6 figures. Wrenna hauled her wheat to the co-op grain elevator herself, in a borrowed truck, and the check that came back cleared the full $91,000 with almost 2 weeks to spare before the bank's deadline. The land stayed hers. There's a real lesson buried in all of that, and it's one worth sitting with if you're a grower, a homesteader, or just someone who loves understanding how farming actually works. Bigger and more powerful isn't always the better tool for the conditions in front of you. Modern combines are extraordinary machines, and on a dry August day, they'll outwork 100 people with scythes without breaking a sweat. But farming has always rewarded the person who reads the actual conditions of their actual field, not the person with the biggest equipment on paper. Wrenna didn't win, because a scythe is better than a combine. She won because she understood her soil, her weather window, and her tools well enough to match the right method to the moment, something her great-uncle's generation had to know instinctively, and something a lot of modern agriculture has quietly forgotten. Corbett Vane, to his credit, showed up at the co-op the week after and told her flatly it was the smartest harvest call he'd seen in 20 years of farming that ground. He hasn't made her another offer on the land since. Marlowe still keeps a small scythe of her own in the shed, sized down for a kid, a gift from Osric for her 10th birthday the following spring. Wrenna says she's already faster with it than half the neighbors who laughed that first morning. If this kind of story means something to you real people, real land, real stakes, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you never miss the next one. And tell me in the comments, have you ever seen an old-fashioned method beat modern equipment on your own land? I read every single one.